Good afternoon, Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Shafiul Islam, Professor Subhash Sharma, Chief Mentor, IBA, dignitaries, invited guests, students, and my colleagues. I'm going to talk about the expectations from higher educational institutions as far as SDGs are concerned. Now, before I start my discussion, I would like to draw your attention on what we are discussing since morning, and which is SDG 4, which talks about education, quality education. And if you look at this, there are three words or set of words which I would like to more highlight upon. So if you look at this, you find the word inclusive here. Now, in the panel discussion, you would have heard the term inclusive being used more than once. So what is it that makes it so very important to discuss the word inclusive? The first thing that comes to my mind is, why should the world not be inclusive? And I'm going to take you through the journey of higher educational institutions, through the journey of universities, to see at what stage we have learned to be more inclusive. So this is something which we still are struggling with. The next set of words is quality education. Now that's again something which we are struggling with, whatever we might be talking about. So I'm going to bring in a contrary view to whatever we have been hearing all along. And then, this is something which is important. Learning for what? Learning so that you can be a lifelong learner, so that you can utilize your learning to the maximum possible extent. So I begin my presentation with a story. How many of you have heard of a place called Easter Island? Anybody? Easter Island? No. It's not surprising that you have not heard of Easter Island. I would have been really surprised if a lot of hands would have gone up that I've heard of Easter Island. That would have been more surprising. So if you notice, what I've written here is 18th century Easter Island and lessons for the present time. So let me take you to where Easter Island is. Can you see a small dot in the South Pacific Ocean, a blue dot? Yes, that is Easter Island. If you open the map of the world, it will be very difficult for you to locate where Easter Island is. It's a tiny island. Why is that tiny island important for us? So let me take you back to the 18th century. This island was a very prosperous island. There were some teams which had gone there. There was a Dutch team which had gone in the early 18th century. There's a Spanish team which had gone a little later. Now what happened is, they all found it to be an extremely prosperous island. A small island with a population of about 3,000, and everybody living happily. The entire place was green. The entire place was flush with resources, food. There was no scarcity of that. It was plenty. And in 1774, English navigator James Cook landed there. And what he found was exactly an opposite picture of that. He found that there were only 600 people who were alive. Just 4 years before the previous team went in, 3,000 became 600 plus. They were living in abject poverty. Trees were cut. The entire place looked like complete ruins. Why did this happen? There must have been some reason. So people started thinking about it, and one of the theories which came up was that the island could not support more population. So as the population grew, the island could not support them. And as a result of which, there was a huge scarcity of food. So people started fighting for food, people started dying, and as a result, the population came down to 600. Now, this, I do not know if you have seen this documentary, A Life on Our Planet. This is a documentary which I would suggest all of you to look at. David Attenborough, when he made this, he was 94 years old. Today he's 97. He's making another documentary on Earth. David Attenborough had said, "We have overrun the world. The real threat is not to the survival of the planet, but to the survival of humanity." Now go back to the Easter Island. Easter Island still survives. People did not. Our planet will still survive. The planet will keep revolving. The planet will keep rotating, whatever. We will not. We are 8 billion today, and 8 billion is a major pressure on the Earth. The first time we heard about sustainability, and I think VC sir had spoken about that, was in the 1970s. That was a good 50 years back. Do you know what was the population in 1970s? The world's population was 3.7 billion. 3.7 billion, the pressure falling on Earth, and 8 billion, the pressure falling on Earth. Just think about it, and you will understand where we stand today. So, we are talking about this, that sustainability first appeared in English language in the 1970s. Now, where does it come from? Where's the genesis of this? So it comes from the Latin word called sustinere. Now, what does sustinere mean? It means simply to hold whatever you have, to maintain it. That's it. Nobody is asking you to do something extraordinary. Just maintain it. And we have failed miserably in that. So it represents a relatively static state of balance and harmony where a range of forces unite in a stable combination. In very simple terms, it means one has to live within one's means. That's it. If we live within our means, we are safe. But unfortunately, we are not. The quota that the world has given us for an entire year, we are these days consuming within the first 5 months. So what are we doing in the next 7 months? We are actually cheating all of you, your next generation, and that is what is happening. So we are not living within our own means. It simply means respecting the laws of nature. We are not doing that. The trees are there, we are cutting it. As you just enter the Nice Road, from the Nice Road junction here to the college, 5 years back, it was absolutely green, lots of trees. We're now building highways, and therefore we're cutting all those trees. We're not respecting the laws of nature. And nature has its own ways to tell us that, look, human beings, be careful. I'm much more powerful than you. And I'll come to that a little later. It also incorporates the notion of human flourishing and well-being. If we respect the laws of nature, human beings will be fine. Believe me, there won't be any danger, but we don't do that. So, I would like to ask all of you this question: why did our previous generations not recognize the challenges of sustainability? What could have been the reason? Why did they not discuss about sustainability? Why are we suddenly awake with a danger impacting us? Why are we talking about sustainability? I did not hear my father talk about it or my grandfather talk about it. Do you know the reason why? Just think about it.
Now scientists are seeing end to humanity soon. And previously things were under control. That's why we are not talking.
How was it under control?
Population was under control.
Population was under control, but it's their gift that the population has become 8 billion. People were less greedy. one of the most important reasons why they never spoke about sustainability issues because they were living within their own means. They used to largely live in the place where they were born, they would die there, they would not venture around too much. But if you find today, we are all, we are not there in our roots. Our roots are somewhere else, we are somewhere else, and we are constantly moving around. That's one reason. The other reason, of course, is greed. The other reason is the increase in population, etc. The world in the 1920s was just 2 billion. 2 billion. Very nice. So my grandfather had a very nice place to live in. We are struggling with 8 billion. The resources are limited. Now, one of the things which I keep asking everybody is, my childhood days, I never had purchased water. Today, we are purchasing water. The nature had given us abundant water. Who has taken away my water? Why should I have to purchase water? It's greed. Just one statistic. Coca-Cola has been sold so many numbers that if you were to put one can on top of another, it will go to the moon and come back again. You don't need a Chandrayaan. All right, moving on. Now we are talking about education and sustainable development. So there's this beautiful book, Earth in Mind, written by David Orr, which talks about that it is difficult to imagine a future that is humane, decent, and sustainable without marked changes in the substance and process of education at all levels, beginning with the university. So education has to play a major, major role if we have to ensure that all of us are safe. Now, any idea when this book came about, Earth in Mind? And I would urge all of you youngsters to read this book. It's phenomenal. Any idea when this book could have been written? No, it was not written recently. That much I can tell you. This book was written almost 30 years back. In 1994 to be precise. So 30 years back, David Orr had spoken about the need for the universities to play a more active role. Has that happened? We don't know. Let's start looking at what higher education is expected to do. It is expected to provide learning for the future. Now, when I talk about learning, I'm talking about learning for the future. Most of the higher educational institutions are stuck in the present. We only talk about the present. We hardly talk about future. So this is something which a higher educational institution is expected to do. It is expected to help the world address the rapidly unfolding social, cultural, economical, and environmental sustainability challenges of the 21st century. That's the topic, that's what we are talking about. It is also expected to produce graduates to contribute creatively and constructively to sustainable development of our planet. Now, these are things which a lot of speakers have spoken about, so I'm not going to dwell on that. What do we have to do? There's something that HEIs have to do. So, HEIs have to undergo critical transformation towards sustainable development in their philosophy and practices. My colleague, Professor Narendra Babu, teaches a course on sustainable management, is it? Sustainable management. Now, is it enough to teach a course? That's a question I would leave here with everybody. We can teach one course. We can teach sustainable supply chain management. We can teach sustainable marketing. We can teach sustainable agri-supply chain management and whatnot. Is it enough to teach? Or is there something else that higher educational institutions need to do? So they have to put in place the required quality assurance systems to ensure transformation is consistently implemented and is effective. So this presentation basically is aimed at covering some points, and I'll go through each of those points. And in the end, I'll also take you through some of the solutions that world has thought of, some of the brilliant work that has been already been done in order to address the problems that we're facing today. So, what is the connection between HEIs and society? How can HEIs foster sustainable development in society? Good practices of HEIs. Role of HEIs in leading societal change by developing capabilities and competences of graduates to contribute to just and resilient society, providing knowledge to all stakeholders and to society at large, substantially empowering learners by promoting a new culture of citizenship. Again, a very important word when we're talking about citizenship. Promoting social inclusion and participation, developing in them a capacity to foresee change. So very important, foresee change and not wait for the change to happen. Develop creative strategies and choose relevant development paths. Now we cannot discuss HEIs and SDGs as two things which are very important. We have the society. We cannot discuss these two without discussing society. But before that, before I enter into HEIs in society, let me just take you through challenges that the HEIs face. And these are real challenges. Now, the first point that I thought about was, has COVID-19 changed HEIs forever? COVID-19 is a crisis of an unimaginable proportion. It is a crisis which struck us. It's a crisis which struck us recently. And therefore, what I have done is I've put COVID-19 there so that all of us who have been affected by COVID-19, we know what has happened in the recent past, in the last 3 years. We would be able to relate to what I'm talking here. You can always replace COVID-19 by the word crisis. So any crisis, it can be anything. So I've just put COVID-19 there. What new iterations of the HEIs might emerge from the crisis? So it's important that we look at the crisis as an opportunity and look at what can HEIs do. How do HEIs reinvent themselves or remold themselves? Is there a need to discuss the future role of HEIs in forums like this? Since morning we said yes, there is a need, and there is a need for such forums to be more vocal. Have the linkages between HEIs and the rest of society got strengthened, or have they got blurred? The answers are still not very clear. We'll try and explore each of these as we go along. Has the pandemic reinforced growing concern within HEIs about the deepening global challenges facing humanity and the planet? The answer is yes, but good ideas, if not implemented properly, are wasted ideas. So therefore, we may have all the good intentions, we may have all the good ideas, but whether the implementation has taken place in the right way, that's something which is important for all of us. With the world's trajectory being unsustainable, can HEIs downplay these as not so significant or merely interesting topics for discussion? As I said, one subject here, one chapter there, one course here, or 2 courses, or a specialization stream alone, that will not help. That probably is not sufficient. So how should HEIs engage with society to highlight SDGs as a transformational vision for achieving social equity and environmental sustainability? Now, those are the questions that we should be asking ourselves, and that's what we need to discuss more and more. Moving on. HEIs have the opportunity and capacity to lead on SDG innovation across their 4 primary functions, and the 4 primary functions are very well known. These are education. We are in the field of education, so education, research, providing leadership, and governance. There is no evidence, no research yet to tell that there is some action that has driven fundamental change till date. So, despite a group of 87 universities coming together and telling that we are going to work on the SDG Accord, there is no definitive research which says that there has been an impact. Now that's something to look about. And we are talking about the last 8 years, since 2015. We still are struggling. The action probably still remains a work in progress project, or, as I said, an intention. An intention is fine, but there is no action on that. HEIs have to get deeply embedded and engaged with the world, working with the crisis, disruptions, and unwanted changes. And therefore, I come to this where this pandemic has actually told us that the humanity's quest for survival has to be looked at. And this is what exactly the 94-year-old British historian David Attenborough had spoken about. What about dealing with the society? How does a higher educational institution deal with the society? So this is society. And this is higher educational institution. Two silos. Now, I don't necessarily subscribe to this model given by Steele and Richards. What I probably look at is something different, and therefore I've put it like this. So there are some institutes which are deeply embedded with the society. Their engagement is very high. But a large majority of the institutes, whether we like it or not, are more interested in educating people, making them relevant for the current job, but they are not taking them one step forward and allowing them to look at the future. So where should HEIs in society be, therefore? So they should ideally be like this: deeply embedded with the society and working together. So this embeddedness and engagement will help find the solutions. All right, let me just digress a little bit and look at the journey of universities oblique HEIs. So what I'm going to list down here are all universities. These are not, you have to use them interchangeably. Any idea around what time, roughly, around what time were these universities set up? Any idea? 500 years back? Professor Kadre said 500 years back. 13th century? 16th century? It's more than 1,000 years, actually. Sir also said 1300, so it would be 1,000. No, it's more than that. Okay, let me give you the exact dates. I think Oxford was set up in 1088, if I'm not wrong. And University of Paris a few years later, Bologna around 1100 something. That was the time when Nalanda was razed. It was completely demolished by a marauder of a Turco-Afghanistan origin called Bakhtiar Khilji. Nalanda was the first global university with fully residential facilities for their students and professors from all parts of the world coming in and teaching there, right? Now there is something which is kind of, there is a similarity between Oxford, between University of Paris, Bologna University in Italy, Nalanda University. There is something which is very similar to all of these. All of these are monastic universities. They are monastic centers. That is how they started off with. Much later, Oxford, became a multidiscipline university in the shape that we see it to be today. Now, these were all monastic universities. They were deeply embedded into the study of religion, or spiritualism. Now that is what they were all doing at that point in time. So taking you to forward to 1852, when John Newman, English scholar, theologian, philosopher, he spoke about something which is very, very interesting. And please look at this. And I would like all of you to look at all those words very, very keenly, the ones which are highlighted here. He says that in those universities, students could come from every quarter. So what is he talking about? He's talking about inclusiveness, right? When? In 1852. How many years back? 170 years, right? Quick maths. All right. 170 years back, Newman was talking about inclusiveness for every kind of knowledge, not religious or spiritual, every kind of knowledge, where inquiry is pushed forward, discovery is verified and perfected, and errors exposed. By what? By collision of mind with mind. All the IBA students know that we have something, courtesy Subhash sir, called 3D. Sir, can we consider that as collision with mind? It is like that, right? And knowledge with knowledge, creating a pure and clear atmosphere of thought. Now this atmosphere is important in which student also breathes. So this is Newman in 1852. Now let me take you to the differences. As I said, the difference comes from the fact that Newman spoke about a community where there were a lot of thinkers, and those thinkers were engaged in a broad liberal education. And I will take you to how Newman's thought process is so very relevant even in 2020, even in 2023. So Newman's thought process was about community of thinkers engaged in a broad liberal education versus the monastic institutions which were focused more on religious and spiritual education. Now, when he talks about broad liberal education, this is true for any crisis. This is true for the COVID-19 crisis as well. So there, he spoke about a community of thinkers in which students learn to think and to reason and to compare and to discriminate and to analyze. Now, do you all do this when you study in a business school? When you're studying in IBA and all the other students from different schools, do you do this? Do you think? Do you reason? Do you compare? Do you discriminate? And do you analyze? You do all of these things. And this is something 170 years back Newman had spoken about. What else did he talk about? He spoke about something which is extremely important to better address the uncertain future. So he's talking about addressing the future, not the present. If we were talking about the present, we would have been stuck in 1852 and we would not have probably progressed further. So HEIs have a greater role than producing qualified individuals fit to take up jobs. I spoke about this. And shaping the whole individual to foresee and address the concerns plaguing the world. Speakers before me have spoken about it. Now, when I talk about the Newman's thought process, it is extremely important that we look at the change that has happened from the monastic universities to Newman. So there was this person called William Humboldt, German philosopher, who gave some of his ideas, and I will take you through how the two ideas do not kind of match with each other. So Humboldt says that you have to have the embedment and the enlightenment of developing autonomous individuals. He spoke about world citizen, and he spoke about knowledge being power, and education bringing liberty. Now, all of these are very, very good points. One of the points that he spoke about, which I've highlighted here, is allowing students the freedom to choose their own studies. How many students today can choose their own studies? Once you have taken engineering, you're stuck with the subjects that the university gives you. Once you have taken any subject, any course of study, you have to do whatever the institution tells you to do. Any idea if you can, let's say, in school, if you could have picked up physics as one of your courses, political science as another course, and let's say English literature as another course. Is that possible? Is that possible? Yes or no? No. Weird, right? You're saying something.
Sir, MIT allows photography with physics and all that. MIT does that.
Came much later. There is a school in India which is run by the Sri Aurobindo Society. It's called the Sri Aurobindo Ashram International School. And if you happen to go to Pondicherry, go and visit that school. Students there have whatever kind of combinations they want, they can take that. With a little bit of a change, NEP also has spoken about it. You can go and find out a little more about that. But if you go and study the Sri Aurobindo Ashram's International School model, you'll find that they're exactly doing this. So you will find students with, studying with biology on one side and economics on the other side. What kind of a combination? But they're doing that. Wonderful. And what kind of students have come out from that school? There are top bureaucrats, there are engineers, there are doctors, there are all kinds of successful professionals. So it works. So he talks about academic freedom, etc., all that. However, where there is a concern is that this influenced, some of the elitist universities of the 19th century European universities, the Harvards and the Stanfords of the world. Not inclusive. But now if I come back and look at what changes happened in 20th century, we would see that there was a remolding of the higher educational institutions. What had happened then was it opened up to a much larger proportion of the population. So if you look at that Humboldt model and the universities that were set up with that model, you'll find they were only catering to some brilliant students who would be trained for civil services. That was the idea. So anybody and everybody could not have got into those universities at that point in time. So in 20th century, we find that a lot of the middle class people, lower middle class people started going to universities. So that was one change that happened. The shift from the pursuit of knowledge as an end in itself towards more utilitarian ends happened in the 20th century. And what was the impact of this shift? There were more specializations which came up. There were more professional courses. There were more professional roles that came up. There were greater cross-institutional competitions within the nation, internationally. All these things came up. Good, bad, ugly, we are not discussing that. Corporate dependence came up. Sponsorship came up. These were not there in the previous era. More standardized curriculums came up. I just said you lost your freedom to choose anything and everything that you wanted to study. The curriculums became very, very standardized. Even today, when we talk about education and SDG, there are a lot of people who start talking in terms of how do you make the curriculum more rigid, more standardized. That may not probably be the answer. So one has to look at it more seriously. Efforts to provide students with practical, employable skills and competences came up. So all those of you from business schools, you know that you come to a business school because your end goal is to get a job. Just cross your heart and ask this, how many of you come to learn? Now that's a very, very difficult question to answer, right? But if I ask you, how many of you come for a job, everybody will raise their hands. So that's 20th century and the 21st century, which it has done. So further, moving on. At some point in time, the university started encouraging students to become more useful to society, challenging the idea that HEIs are independent entities, free to choose what they become. So I showed you society and HEIs. HEIs do not function independent of anything else. They're part of the society. A functionalist lens emphasizing the relationship between HEIs and the world, underlying the influence of external drivers, lesser response to academic or educational choices in the form of pedagogy, in the form of curriculum, in the form of research, more reflection of contemporary requirements. And this, I'm not going to get into this because this is a huge debate in itself, commercialization of higher educational institutions and academic capitalism. So I'm not going to get into that. Then in which case what will happen is I'll digress from the main topic itself. Now, each of these institutions that you have seen are highly resilient. These universities, they are remarkably resilient. They have stayed there for 1300 years, 1200 years, 1000 years. These are all very, very old institutions. And in those 1300, 1200 years, many companies came, went, nobody remembers where they are. We had a very fine book called Built to Last by Jim Collins. All those of you who have read it would know that some of the companies that Jim Collins had given as an example there in that book no longer exist. And what? They were 100 years old, 120-year-old companies. By the way, the longest serving company in the world is a Japanese company which is close to 1750 years old. It is still functioning. There are, there are hotels and restaurants which are about 1200, 1300 years old. So it's not just that universities only are resilient, but yes, universities are remarkably resilient. They are society's longest standing institutions. They have withstood centuries of changing circumstances, including severe disruptions, including COVID-19. COVID-19, many institutions closed down, but most of them have survived. Most of them have survived because they're resilient. In the meantime, they have also grown in global size, scope, scale. They're no longer in the realm of elite, now accessible for many in the community. A success story in the modern history, culture, and society. So it's a truly resilience machine. Now, what are the resilience challenges? Crisis of unsustainability. Now just look at this. There are too many of the highly resilient things that need to change, but do not change. Now we have been talking for years now about the need for changing the fossil fuel driven cars. The fossil fuel driven car culture is a different thing. First of all, getting the fossil fuel cars removed from our systems itself is a major challenge. We have been talking for a long time. I do not see that in the foreseeable future it's going to happen. It will take more time. But if you look at the culture, now, all of us here drive our cars, come to office, and many of us come from the same place, but we still drive one car, one person, whereas easily 3 more persons could have sat there. We don't do that. We need to change it, but no, we can't change that. Of course, capitalist greed, lesser said the better. Things that we desperately need to preserve, our natural ecosystem, social systems of care, etc. These are being systematically eroded. So on one side, things that need to change are too resilient for us to change. And things that need to be preserved are not being preserved. They are getting eroded. So there's a big challenge here. So the question in front of us is, can our universities or the higher educational institutions be the harbingers of the change required to address these challenges? So let's look at some probable solutions. Now for the solutions, the points that we need to deliberate are the existing approaches to universities adequately meeting societal and planetary needs? So there is an opportunity. Any crisis gives us an opportunity. Whether we look at it as a crisis or an opportunity, it's up to us. So there is an opportunity to reimagine the nature of the relationship between the SDGs and the higher educational institutions as part of a broader social contract focused on a sustainable future. Solution may lie in collective choice, and I'll give you examples how collaboration and collective work has helped overcome many of these challenges. Solution may lie in collective choice, not the individual decision of a market consumer. HEIs, therefore, should be collective and cooperative, operating at the level of society. So if you remember the picture that I had shown you, that the HEIs have to be completely engaged and embedded into the society. US Professor Ronald Barnett, he had given a very good concept called the ecological university. So he asked this question, is it possible to come forward with an idea of the university that has a measure of feasibility anchored in the real world and expressive of some hope and measure of optimism? So what he does is he calls for the need to reconceive the university and its planet and its place in the planet afresh. So he talks about HEIs first to sustain themselves. Now every speaker who came to our campus spoke about the green campus. We are an extremely green campus. Our buildings are green, though we have not certified it, but they are green. And we are very proud of the fact that the air that we breathe in is very fresh. In fact, all those of you who live in the city and come here would always find a degree or 2 degrees less in the campus as opposed to what is there in the city. So HEIs have to sustain themselves. They also have to acknowledge that they are for the world and not from the world. So HEIs have to look at their basic philosophies. It's not just that we are a part of the world. We are there for the world. We are there to do something for the world. HEIs will have to change for a larger cause. They'll have to exhibit ecological and evolutionary resilience. I will leave this. This is Australian sociologist Connell. She has given a concept called good university. What I'll do is I'll just quickly take you through the 5 principles that Connell has given and which are very, very valid. She's talking about a university to be democratic, to be engaged, to be truthful, to be creative, and to be sustainable. You can find out Connell's 5 principles of the good university. But what is more important for us to look at are some questions. And these are critical questions. When we talk about the good university, we should be asking these questions. Good for whom? Is it good for the university? Good for the society? Good for the world? For whom? Good when? Is it good now? Or is it good for the future? If it is good now, there are tons of those universities which are good. So therefore, we need to look at whether it is good for the future or not. Good for what? Who gets to decide what is good? Or even what is good enough? So these are critical questions that needs to be asked. Are HEIs good enough? not for what the world wants, but what the world needs. We can't address the world's wants. We can certainly play a positive role in addressing the world's needs. That's what we should be asking. Ability of HEIs to independently and single-handedly affect the betterment of the society or higher education can be one of the critical factors, a tool affecting these processes. Finally, the debate of social good versus profit, this will keep continuing. And this continuing, we will continue to debate in forums like these. Are there any other alternate suggestions? I'll take you through some interesting suggestions, which is called a free university. Any idea what is a free university? What could be a free university? Just think about it. If you go to a university where you don't have to pay anything, could that be a free university? Not always. Not always. Okay, let me take you through some examples. Free universities are built from the scratch in spaces created by a community. And we spoke about collective work. We spoke about community work. So these are built from the scratch in spaces created by a community for sharing of knowledge. Knowledge and ideas are freely shared among equals. This is shared by a community of users who also define the modes of use and production, distribution and circulation of these resources through democratic and horizontal forms of governance. Key themes are these: access, commoning practices. Commoning practices means people can come together, put self-labor into the work and thereby create something. So in this case, we're talking about university. Again, there is a person called Paul Freire. If you read his work, you'll find that he had spoken about critical arguments, and from there the commoning practices here came in. Collective self-management and community. Now, are these achievable? Are these at all, it should not be that there is something which is an absolute utopian thing. Are these achievable? Can they be real? There are a lot of free universities existing. Now, if you look at them, let me take you through this. This is a university in Mexico, Universidad de la Teria, or Uniteria. Uniteria, you can go and find more about it. It was formed by the community to address local concerns. So they said that we have to address the concerns of the planet. We have to ensure that we address the climatic concerns. And they formed a university. They called it Uniteria. No government, no private funding, nothing. The community built it up. This is another fantastic university. And it is truly free. It's called People's Free University, or the University of the People in Canada. It's the only online university in the world which is free. Anybody can go and take admission to that university. They'll not charge a single penny. And this is an accredited program. So the programs, the certificates are valid all across the world. Again, what a concept. So they are not just sticking to the confines of, or the limits of infrastructure that needs to be built for a university. Similarly, the Universidad Trashumant in Argentina, or the Academies of Solidarity in Turkey. This is another very interesting university. So what happened is the authoritarian regime of Turkey, they had purged a lot of professors, a lot of academicians. So they came together, and then they said, we'll start working for the society. And they started working for society from various cities in Turkey. So there were various academies that got set up. And then they got all of those together and they started calling them as the academies of solidarity. So these academy basically, one city can address a different set of problems which are there for that locality itself, that city itself. Another academy will work on some other set of problems, but they are working for the problems that are existing in that particular area. Now, we may have a different set of problems in Bangalore, we may have a different set of problems in Chennai. Why should the same solution be given to every city? So therefore, if there is something which is working in Chennai for the problems of Chennai, there will be some other institute which will be working in Bangalore to address the concerns of Bangalore. That is what Academies of Solidarity is doing. And these are all minded, purged educationists. They were removed from their jobs. There are quite a few eco-versities, and I would urge all of you to go to this website. Excuse me. All of you to go to this website and study more about eco-versities. You'll find it very, very fascinating, the kind of work people are doing. And I said, in the free universities, there are a few eco-versities. There are tons of them. You can find a lot of them. In India itself, you'll find a lot of them. They may not be the regular higher educational institutions. They may not be the degree granting institutions, but they work on the principles that I just spoke about. So, in the end, let me just summarize it. Where do you think the solutions lie in? The solutions, as we see, lies in one, community engagement. We cannot ignore that, so that's something which we should be seriously looking at. The other one, I'm calling it the Swayambhu. Swayam, we know, is self. Bhu means taking birth. Now here, please note that I'm not talking about individuals, you and me as Swayam, the community where you and me are all together as Swayam. So this could be one solution, and free universities, eco-versities have shown that the solution lies there. We need to go from mainstream to many streaming. Now, the moment when we talk about community, we are talking about many streaming. Then we have got some interesting things that we have forgotten. Latin America gives us buen vivir. Buen vivir is good living, well living. So we started off by, when I started off by putting what is sustainability there, I spoke about how to live properly, how to live nicely. So buen vivir teaches us that. Ubuntu is about living together. So it basically, the philosophy says that I am not because of what I am, but because of what we all are. So that's a concept which is extremely important in education today to address the concerns that are being raised. And then we've got our own Swarajas, being self-reliant, self-governance. So therefore, now if you look at these three, Buen Vivir, Ubuntu, and Swaraj, and mix all of them together, you've got your solution. Probably that is what free universities are doing, and that is where the solution lies in. So every HEI has a definitive role to play, and therefore the idea is to look within. Thank you, everybody.